Welcome to the Ages of Rock podcast with your hosts, Bill Algie, Dennis Talbot, and Alan Tate. We are three guys who have one thing in common, a love of rock and roll. Our goal is to talk about all things rock. We hope you find this show intriguing, funny, and occasionally highly opinionated. Enjoy!
Hey, welcome back to the Ages of Rock podcast. It's Bill and Dennis. We have a guest tonight, which is Marc Canter. Marc's got a project he's been working on called, let's see, The Early Days of GNR. Is that the name of it, or that's a different name?
It's actually it is about the early days of GNR, but it's called The First 50 Gigs.
First 50 gigs of Guns N' Roses. We probably heard of them, being 80s fans, maybe a little bit, slightly. So, Marc, you want to talk to us a little bit about kind of what your project is, and then I'm sure we'll have a ton of questions for you.
Sure. Okay. So back in the day, I grew up with Slash when we were like 11 years old, and we started riding bikes together. And I noticed that his artwork was really good, and so he had extra talent. But riding bikes, he was also doing things that were outrageous, and I just knew he was a little bit more superhuman than the rest of us. And we lost touch for about a year or so during the middle of junior high schools. And when we met up again, it's probably like summer of 1981. So we lost touch for about a year. He was already playing guitar. And when we were hanging out, we weren't listening to music before that. And so now we meet up and I got an Aerosmith shirt on. He's got a Zeppelin shirt on. We're both into music and he's playing guitar. I had actually just started playing guitar and I just instinctively knew that his band was going to be good. And so I actually went with him that day to see his band, which was Titus Sloan. And right away, they were playing some Black Sabbath covers and a couple originals and some blues and whatever. But right away, he had the sound and he had the feel, and you just knew that was going to be his calling. So I started documenting him, really, at recording some of those rehearsals and parties, and taking photos and saving the flyers, and as if I would do for Aerosmith, because I was an Aerosmith collector. And so, it's like another piece of memorabilia. And why wouldn't you put a $1 cassette tape and push play and record? And now you got the show, you could listen to it in your car, and then at some point video came around, I started doing that. But so that's basically where my story starts. And eventually we go through different members of different bands until we get the Appetite for Destruction lineup. And May of 1985, the end of May actually was the last day in May. And their first gig that they played together was June 6th at the Troubadour. So they really were only together 1 week before they played a gig. And then they took off to Seattle, which was called Hell Tour. And, that kind of was hard for them to get there. Their car broke down. And I think that trip kind of solidified them. It gave them, it made them more than just musicians that were fit. They kind of like suffered a little bit together. So they were like, they were now a gang, you could say. So basically, I documented all those gigs. And, the first time they played Welcome Jungle was like, when was that? That was July 20th at the Troubadour, 1985. And, not soon later came a Rocket Queen, September 20th at the Troubadour. And then Paradise City showed up at the Troubadour on October 10th. And Night Train showed up in December at the Music Machine, and then My Michelle at the Troubadour. So there was no songs in between that didn't make the cut. Everything they put together worked, and it worked well. It was like watching Led Zeppelin, just like they couldn't write a bad song. And the way the arrangements were and the guitar solos is pretty much the same as you hear it on the record. So, I knew what, they just had to not go to jail, not die, or not break up, and they're going to make it. So it's just a matter of helping them get to the next gig, helping them with maybe some flyers or an ad in a magazine or guitar strings, just, maybe some food from, Canter's Deli. That's my family's place for the last 90 years. But at the time it was probably 60 years. that was, oh my God, some of that's 40 years ago. But anyways, so after they did make it and they got signed and they got out there, I knew I had all this stuff and I would do a scrapbook someday, and started working on the project in 1993, 1994. Took about 15 months to put together. And at the time, the band was sort of falling apart and they weren't agreeing on things. And so my agent was a little greedy, and I don't think any publishers wanted to pay, like a $75,000 advance. So the book kind of got scrapped and it sat for 12 years. And I bumped into Jason Porath, who's my co-author, who ended up helping me put out, which was called Reckless Road. And that's my Guns N' Roses book. It was initially called The First 50 Gigs, but we changed it to Reckless Road. But so now, the book comes out, but we stumbled on that too, because it's a great book, but it was an independent publisher and there was some issues and didn't really get out in the way it needed to get out. It's still out now, actually, but you got to like go on the internet and get it. And so anyways, we wanted to do a documentary around the same time as doing the book, but at the time we couldn't really get the rights to the music, the sync rights and all that stuff. The band wasn't on the same page, and it was complicated. So we left it at the book, and we knew that one day we'd catch up. Well, let's fast forward to now, last year. So it's the pandemic, and Jason really was not doing much, had a little bit more time on his hand, and everyone started doing zooming back and forth with, meetings, and, even the news is on Zoom now these days. So it's kind of common. So he decided, why don't we do that documentary, but in a format of a Zoom? And we could, track down more people now that we couldn't track down during Reckless Road. For instance, at the time, I wasn't able to get the original drummer, which is Rob Gardner. He was the original LA Guns drummer that came with Tracy Guns. And then when Guns N' Roses got together, he was there for, 4 months before he quit with Tracy. But so there was a handful of people we missed. So now during the pandemic, we've been playing around with this, and we came up with we brought a good team on board. We brought some fans on board that really care about the project and that want to see it, kind of direct in the direction of what we're looking to do. It seemed to be how the roots of the band, we all know what happens once Guns N' Roses got together, but how exactly did they get together? How, it was a sliding doors. One almost didn't come in, one left, there was things going back and forth. And so we wanted to, get into the heads of the mindsets of all the musicians and some roadies and some people that were there before it became the Appetite for Destruction lineup. And then once they do become that, it's the first season ends right as they play one gig at the Troubadour, and then they're off to Hell Tour, and then it just ends for first season. But in the second season, we'll go through all the gigs, and there'll be just some information that's not in the book, or just, what was going on in that day that the gig took place. Did they get arrested on the way to the gig? Did they get pulled over? Who was late for the gig and why? And just there's a lot of fun little nuances, little different things that I know about them, and whatever I don't know, some of the people we interviewed do know. And so why not put it together and make a really cool documentary podcast? So that's what we're doing, the first 50 gigs, and we're here.
Cool.
That sounds actually really interesting.
It does really.
It's like I'm sold.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of interesting. I think the COVID thing is as much damage as it did to people, and from a variety of reasons, right? Financially, health reasons, and then just mental stability issues. It really brought a lot of opportunity for people to do the stuff you're talking about, which was, take a little time, pause, and get some stuff done. That's pretty cool. That sounds like a really cool project. I can't wait to watch it. I think it sounds really neat.
Yeah, it's really, we have video clips, and we have, I recorded all those shows, so you get to hear what they say between the songs. So like, for instance, the first time they played Rocket Queen, you hear Axl say, "This is the new one. It's not much, but it's the best I could do. This is for Bart." Song's called Rocket Queen. And then the band goes into Rocket Queen. So it's like you get goosebumps knowing that there it is. It's, and that was the first time I heard it. I had heard Slash and Duff and Izzy working on it at a rehearsal, but I didn't hear the melody or the vocals. I just heard the instrumental part of it. So you don't really know what you're getting. And then that night at the gig, all of a sudden, there it is. It's like, whoa. There's also some other neat things, like when Slash heard that Slash was looking, his band was Titus Sloan and they grew into Road Crew, his garage band. And Road Crew kind of fell apart, even though Duff was in it for about a week. And then he took off. And it was just Steven and Slash. And they were looking for a bass player, a singer, possibly a second guitar player. And we heard, they heard about this band called Hollywood Rose or Rose, whatever they were called at the time. And Slash somehow had a hold of the demo tape. Actually, because Izzy heard that Slash had did this Aerosmith drawing for me. And he wanted to get a hold of it. So Slash was working at this music store on Fairfax and Melrose. And Izzy walked in to try to get a copy and gave Slash his demo tape. So that was, that was like almost planting a seed right there. And so we had listened to that demo tape, 6-7 months later, and they were playing at Gazzari's. It was a battle of the bands, like 3 songs a band. And it's like $1 to get in. So I drove Slash and Steven there and we watched Rose play, and it had Izzy and it had Axl, and
Terrible.
Chris Webber was the guitar player who put out Hollywood Rose's music a little while back. But so, right away, just from hearing the demo, I was sold on Anything Goes, Axl's vocals. And that night, Axl was kind of vibrating all over the place, and Izzy was kind of running back and forth with his guitar. And you knew that there was something there that was good. And so that Slash met up with Axl, and the next morning, Slash and Steven joined Rose. And the Chris Webber was out, and actually, as strange as this may seem, Izzy kind of disappeared. He didn't want to stick around, and he joined this band called London, which Nikki Sixx had been through. A handful of other musicians over the years. The band that never really made it, but everyone that stepped in there made it in another way, another shape, way, or form.
Yeah,
I believe there was a lot of people, maybe members of Wasp, that went through that band. But okay, so anyways. Hollywood Rose, what was interesting is you almost had 4 of the members of Guns N' Roses. You didn't have Duff in it, but Steven was still playing double bass drums. And what's interesting is Steven's double bass drums is what actually got Slash to have him join his garage band Road Crew, because Adam Greenberg was the original high school drummer, and he had a single bass drum, and he was good for what he did. But Slash saw that double bass, and he just was like, oh my God, let's just change this and go with the double bass. But the double bass didn't work out in Hollywood Rose because it basically drowned out the songs, and you couldn't really hear Axl, just barely hear Axl because that double bass was just going. And so Hollywood Rose lasted about 3 months, and then it fell apart, and Axl immediately joined Slash's rival, which was Tracy Guns, into LA Guns. And there was Slash and Steven looking for a band again. And in a strange way, he actually almost joined Poison, even though he didn't want to. But it was like I was pushing him to do it because he didn't have a band. And that Matt Smith, who was the guitar player from Poison, got his wife pregnant, and he was going to move up, back to Pennsylvania and start a family. And he wanted Slash to join because he saw they gigged with Hollywood Rose, and he knew that Slash was, Slash had it. And he wanted to see his replacement being Slash. Slash couldn't bring himself to join, and they ended up hiring Cece. I don't think.
What kept him from joining Poison? I mean, was it just their style, or the music they were doing, or was it what? The music direction, or
the music was kind of bubblegum rock, and he didn't like it. It sprayed silly string all over the place. And then there was a part in the show where they had to introduce themselves and, hi, my name is Slash. And I don't think he was, Slash, you didn't hear much from Slash for the first few years. He hid behind his hair, and that was the end of that. So but see, I'm looking at this Kiss stuff in the background, and now I'm going to jump to a Kiss story that nobody really knows this, and Slash sort of forgot it. But back in 1982-ish, when Slash had a chance of joining Kiss, and so Ace left, and it was quiet. Nobody knew that Vinnie Vincent was going to be the new guitar player because they didn't pick him yet. And the guy, his name was Hero, that owned the Hollywood music store that Slash worked on, where actually Genghis Khan is there now. It's on Melrose and Fairfax. He, in between customers, Slash would plug into an amp and doodle around. So anyone with a half a brain could see that Slash had something going. So he got word to, he was in the music business. He got word to somebody that Slash was a shit. So he actually got himself an interview with Paul Stanley, but it was over the phone. Slash was 17 at the time. And I think Paul Stanley was a little afraid that, hey, this guy's a minor, that I don't know if I want to bring a minor into this. This is kind of a wild band and underage girls, who knows what's, just whatever it is, it's not going to work. But he did interview Slash over the phone. I was standing right next to Slash. I couldn't hear Paul Stanley, but I heard Slash's answers. And later I found out it was, could you tour? Would you be able to record? The basic things that Paul would be asking. And I kept hearing Slash say, yeah, I could do that. I could pull that off. Sure, I could do that. And Paul never really saw a picture of Slash, and he never heard a demo of Slash. So I think that what spooked him was the 17-year-oldness of that. And otherwise, if Slash would have had like an in-person interview, like, learn a couple Kiss songs and show up and play, I'm pretty sure he would have got the gig. And they would have figured out something about him being underage, his parents can sign off on it or whatever. And Kiss would have been a really better band, and Guns N' Roses might not have been ever got out of Hollywood. So there's a story that's lost. That's just one story, but it's interesting because that's like sliding doors. What if Paul Stanley would have taken that extra step to take a better look at Slash? Who knows what would have happened. So that's just one little thing. But there's a lot of it was excitement. It was watching them play at the street scene. And that was the first time they played in front of a crowd. When I say a crowd, I don't know, maybe there was 2,000 people there, because it's a free gig in downtown. Before they played at the Troubadour, and they started, each gig started getting a little bit bigger and bigger. They started with 50 people, and pretty soon there was like 200 or 300 people, but they'd never played for 2,000 people. And they were opening up for, actually they weren't opening up, but the band after them was Social Distortion, who was a well-known band at that time. And the punk natives were there, to see that band. And the Guns N' Roses was supposed to go on at 5:30, and it was already 8:30. So that tells me that Social Distortion was probably supposed to go on at 6. So the people were getting restless, kept seeing other bands that weren't who they came to see. And then, they think they're going to see their band, and who comes up? Guns N' Roses. And it's like, oh my God. So they were spitting at them. They were throwing food at them. They were shaking the stage. But Guns N' Roses held on. And they by the third song, they had that audience in the palm of their hands. And that's when I realized that they're just more than a really great band. They're a stadium band. The way they were moving is like you'd see the Rolling Stones or Aerosmith, or how they handle a stadium crowd. So that showed me that there was a lot of energy on that stage. The band not only had guitar playing and songwriting and vocal, melody and vocal different ranges, but they also had a really good stage presence. And Guns N' Roses is probably one of the last bands that you will find yourself there where you go to hang their poster on your wall. I remember as a kid, you go to Westwood and come back with the Michael Schenker poster or a Zeppelin poster or something, cool. And you could identify all the members in the band. Now you don't really have that. You go to see Muse or Muse puts out a record, it's great, but go see them in concert, you'll fall asleep. It's just, there's something about, Jimmy Page, the way they moved, and just the way those bands from the 60s and 70s had a stage presence. And Guns N' Roses was really the last band to have that stage presence. And, of course, that's not all. Obviously they had the songwriting, and what made it so special was four of them were living together in the studio. Axl, Axl's goal in 1984, when I first met him, he was working at Tower Video. Sometimes, he basically was homeless. He'd find a girlfriend to sleep at house on their couch, not on their couch, but if he couldn't hook up with a girl, he would sleep at a friend's couch or in their car or something. And sometimes he'd strike out and end up on the stairwell of sleeping behind Tower Video on Sunset Boulevard. And he told me it didn't matter where he slept, but his goal was to get a gym membership so he could have a place to shower. Not to work out, but a place to shower. It didn't matter where I sleep as long as I could clean up in the morning. So that was his expectations. That was his goal, is get that gym membership. So you have, it's just a lot of they were writing about what, the police chasing them, girlfriends tattling on them, this, that, all the pressure that was on the street is basically you're going to find an appetite for destruction.
Right.
After that, and they got apartments and they started moving up in the world. Sure, they still wrote. They didn't lose their talent, but they didn't have the same things to write about. Maybe the record company ripping them off, maybe, a couple things like that. But there's something magical about that. And the only thing if I can go back in time, I almost wish they didn't get signed when they got signed. I wish they could have gone another 3-4 months before they got signed, because they were writing songs naturally. It was like just coming out of nowhere. These songs were coming out. And once they got signed, what they wanted to do was take their music and get it out. And they got into trouble and they got evicted from their apartment, and they almost got dropped by the record company. So there was a lot of, that's where Reckless Road comes from, because it was supposed to be a chapter in the book right after they got signed, where things were just going, things were looking like this band is never going to make it. It's all going to fall apart in 1 second from now. So, and the record company was waiting for 1 or 2 more songs for them to come up with, which they did. Well, actually, they came up with 3 more songs. They came up with You're Crazy, 4 more songs, You're Crazy, Brownstone, Sweet Child, and It's So Easy after they got signed. And then, enough said, as soon as they had Sweet Child and Brownstone, they were ready to go in their studio, and It's So Easy was just a bonus track, which is probably one of my favorite songs.
It's probably one of the best.
Right.
Yeah, that's really the blood pumping. They all, I mean, people ask me, what's your favorite Guns N' Roses song? I don't have one. They all mean something different to me, and you can't, it's like asking, which is your favorite kids? You have 3-4 kids, and you can't, they're your kids. So they're all good. But so that's pretty much what I documented. And it's kind of like the Ken Burns effect, because when you hear the band talking in between the songs, and they're talking about, this is the new one, and you almost feel like you're there in the audience here, watching it. Like it's like, it makes you feel like you're actually there. And that was my goal, because sure, they're my friends, and I knew, I saw it happen. But to me, it's a different perspective when someone that grew up as a fan, those kids are 14, 15 years old, they hear Appetite, and they get influenced to either play guitar or another instrument or whatever. And, some music is powerful, and whatever you're doing in your life, it gets you through the day, it gets you through, whatever. So there's a lot of people. I know this because I grew up an Aerosmith fan, and I collected Aerosmith, and I know what it is to get that knowledge, to get that extra knowledge of how your favorite song came together, or what's behind it, or sometimes you just don't get that. There's no band that's been documented from scratch, or even before. I was documenting / riding bikes, doing artwork. So I don't know if you have a copy of Reckless Road, but if you don't, I'll send you one.
Yeah, I'd like to have it.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah.
What? So are you? I mean, do you talk to Slash often? I mean, are you still in contact with him, or?
I'm in texting contact.
Right.
Because for years. I mean, when I
Right.
say years, I'm talking 30 years.
Right.
We don't see each other much. If there's a gig, I'll see him at the gig, or sometimes he'll drive by Canter's. If he's in the neighborhood, he'll stop by, say hi.
Sure.
I don't really, he doesn't come over my house. I don't come over his house. It's just that, if I needed something, he's there. If he needs something, I'm there. So he's too busy. Slash is
Right.
playing with everyone's. He's doing his own band. He's doing
Oh
Guns.
yeah.
He gets on stage with this one. He gets on stage with that one. It's also good for him. It's good for his sobriety to do that, because it keeps him busy. You don't want him to get bored. He's probably the hardest working person I know. I mean, during the promoting Guns N' Roses gigs, I remember when you'd have to sell like 50 tickets, or like when they played the Roxy. Here's a good one. They opened, believe it or not, I guess it's St. Valentine, which became Warrant, with Janie Lane in it. But they were the opener. There was 3 bands. They were the opener. They had to sell, and it's like their 5th gig maybe. They had to sell 100 tickets at, I think, I don't know, $8 or $9 a ticket to be able to play that gig. So, I would kind of front the money for that, and then they'd all try to sell tickets to their friends or whatever, and whatever left. Sometimes it'd be like maybe 15, 20 tickets left. I would be outside trying to sell those tickets to people that were coming to see St. Valentine, that, let's say it was $10 to get in. I'd say, I'll give you the ticket for $8, just I try to not eat these tickets. And meanwhile, the band's going on stage. I'm missing like the first song because I'm outside
Hustling.
Out of all, every time they had to do that, nobody moved more tickets than Slash. He'd call people. He was on the phone. I mean, he actually got fired from Centerfold Newsstand for conducting band business on company time because he was constantly on their phone, booking gigs or calling people. Hey, we got a gig. Slash would hustle 24/7. He would make the flyer. He'd draw on the tickets. Like the Troubadour would give you like, a couple hundred of this. The Troubadour was a free gig. You didn't have to pay to play the Troubadour. It was only the Roxy or other places that you had to pay. But they would give you the tickets, but he would write, Guns N' Roses, and he's kind of, put a little, little rose on it or whatever. And it was all in his handwriting. I mean, sometimes Axl would help on that stuff too, but he was a hardworking person, really. I mean, for rehearsals and sound checks, and he was just, like the postman, constantly.
So,
what demons he had, never, what drugs he took or what alcohol he drank, didn't matter. He made it there to make sure that Slash doesn't miss a gig, and he makes sure that the gig is, like everything is ready to go.
cool.
It's as
Now,
professional as they come.
is everybody, as far as people that are in the band or previously in the band, everybody on board with this project that you're doing? I mean, as far as
not necessarily. There was it's kind of complicated. See, I focused on the old stuff, but it's a fair question to dip into what's going on now. But I kind of watched a handful of close people to Axl kind of get picked off one by one, and I didn't know really what was causing it. But in 2007, when I finally started to get, Axl approved my book in 1993, 1994, and he was really happy about it too. He knew what I was doing when I did it. He even boycotted a show when they wouldn't let me videotape. He said, then we won't play. I mean, he backed me. But in 2007, him and Slash weren't in the best place. And so he didn't really want that information to come out because he was trying to move on with another direction. And to me, that's where we disagreed, because you can't move into a new direction unless you celebrate where you came from, your history.
Right.
And the whole reason why people are going to come see you is because they bought Appetite for Destruction. It's just, you can't bury that album. That's it. And after that, even the Use Your Illusion records and whatever. But so I kind of went into intervention mode, and every interview I did and every time I blogged on the internet, I was really kind of talking to Axl and trying to explain to him that Slash wasn't such a bad person, and that if you had a marriage counselor or whatever, you could work out that. I knew what each of their gripes were, and I knew that it was easily fixable. And the problem is it was a third party that didn't support we'll call it intervention. And so Axl wasn't exactly getting the information the way it was coming. And so he has inaccurate intel, we'll call it. And it wasn't hard for him to be upset because nobody likes an intervention. Everyone that needs an intervention, I've never seen anyone that are happy, that maybe after when they realize they needed it, they're happy, but right. While you're giving it to them, they don't want to know about it. So unfortunately, that stuff's on a hold right now with Axl. And one day when he figures out what I was doing, and when he sees this, if they even let him see it, because for a while they kept him off the internet, so he couldn't read some of the things I was saying. But it's basically, they have a control on him, and they don't want him to see certain things, so they shelter him. But it doesn't stop me from reporting the history. So I love him. I'll do anything for him. And when he's ready, he knows where to find me.
That's cool.
That's, bands go through a lot of different things over the years, and they get, they are friends and close, and then they get apart, and it's not the first band that's ever happened to, that's for sure. But it's kind of interesting because over the years, when you look back at Guns N' Roses history, there's been a lot of history like that over the years where it's very polarizing, and that's tough. I mean, it's difficult.
It is. You see that with the Eagles. You see that, and then eventually they get back together. But it's usually because, and you see it with family members, not even in bands, that siblings that don't talk for 30 or 40 years, and then, you know, they're on their deathbed and then finally they talk. But it's never anything complicated. I mean, I shouldn't say never. Sometimes it might be complicated, but
Yeah.
In the Guns N' Roses, from my perspective, and I was probably one of two people that were still talking to Axl and Slash up until that 2007 time. So I was in Rio for Rock in Rio 3 when Guns N' Roses played there in 2001. Axl flew us out there. You know, I was in that circle. But like I said, while I was in it, I saw people that should still be in it got kind of evicted from it for no reason. And I've talked to some of those people, and nothing adds up. So it's we all you know, in our opinion, it's a third party influence, but that's besides the point. Obviously, when he sees these, they let him see these podcasts, he could do nothing but be happy it's there. I mean, I documented this for the band, I documented it for me, and I documented it for the fans. And at the time I was putting together the book, Axl said exactly that. This will be good for you, this will be good for us, and this will be good for the fans. It's very simple. That's what it is. And how could it be any different? I mean, he even has lyrics in Use Your Illusions, Get in the Ring, talking about, you know, Bob Guccione Jr., about, you know, hit parade or spin, whatever, about ripping off people that paid her hard-earned money to learn about the bands they want to know about. Well, that's it. There's people out there that want to know, that don't even know I exist unless they have my book. But they might have my book, but they still don't have all my, you know, everything that's in my head or in these other people we're interviewing his head. So I mean, I've seen a couple of these these episodes, and they're really put together good. And it's moving. It's just, you know, I know this information and I was there doing it, but when I watch it back, I even get goosebumps, because I know what it is for a fan that doesn't know this to watch it and learn these details about how certain things came about. And it's powerful. It's moving.
That's
Cool.
really cool.
You know, I think the cool part about that for me is, you know, and we've talked about it on the show all the time. Those bands from that era, and, you know, Kiss, the Eagles, you know, even those bands that were even before the 80s era, they're never going to be bands like that again. The bands that are out now, you know, the stuff you hear on the radio, the pop stuff that kids hear on the radio and stuff like that, they're never going to have what we had. They're never going to, when they're 55 years old, they're not going to be spinning, you know, Cardi B and that bullshit stuff. I mean, it's not, because it's just not going to stand the test of time. It's just, and to your point, I think, you know, I know that Dennis does too. And I know that Alan, you know, our other co-host, you know, we like watching those old biographies about the Bee Gees and about, I mean, even that's, you know, even the Bee Gees, you know, that and Tina Turner and anybody else, you know, it's all that stuff is cool to see. That
That you never knew,
intimate
yeah,
stuff, that you never knew, and you go, how did they even make it through some of that stuff? You know, there was some crazy shit that went on. You know,
Even the Linda Ronstadt documentary, we watched it last year, and that was really good. There's something about that. I mean, what's also missing today, and when I say today, this left about, I'm going back even 15 years ago, is record companies. They've basically disappeared. And so it used to be, you know, let's take Poison, for example. I hate to do it, but let's take Poison. They were getting some success in their hometown, but they knew if they wanted to make it, they had to come to LA. Now, if you come to LA, I don't care who you are, you're going to get nothing. Nothing's going to happen. And there's nothing in LA. So you know, I don't know if you saw the Laurel Canyon documentary that Jacob Dylan did. I think it's called Echo in the Canyon.
I saw some of that, but I have not watched the whole thing. Yeah.
When it ended, and I know Jacob Dylan because they used to play, Wallflowers used to play at Cantor's in the Kibitz Room, but I didn't want it to end. When it ended, I was like, no, I wanted to see another hour, because it just, I know it had to end, but it was just so interesting on that mid time in the 60s when, you know, when the Byrds and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young and all that was going on in the Laurel Canyon, Frank Zappa and the Beatles would come by and hang out with them. And and the cops would come, and Neil Young wants to beat up the cops, and just all that, all that. I mean, it's just so interesting. And you just, like I said, bands used to come here to make it, and now it's over. I mean, you might find new music that someone made on their computer, and it might be good, but you're not going to get a rock and roll band anymore. It's just not going to happen. There's no way to get it out there. But here's the interesting thing: you could get your music on iTunes and on YouTube and Facebook and whatever. You can. It's the internet. The technology gives you things that bands didn't have in the 70s and 80s.
Right.
You have those tools, but the problem is nobody cares, and so you're not going to be found. So it's just crazy. It's like in 300 years from now, when we're long gone, I promise you, at a football game, you're going to hear "Welcome to the Jungle," or
You're probably right.
I remember when I'm in Los Angeles, so when Eric Gagne used to come out to close for the Dodgers, they'd play "Welcome to the Jungle." Or who knows where else. You're going to hear Zeppelin, you're going to hear the Beatles, you're going to hear the Stones, they're going to hear Aerosmith. There's like 20, 30 of those bands, or maybe more, that will last the test of time.
Yep.
But some bands will just disappear at some point and just be completely forgotten and gone. But like I said, some of the music, even on these forgotten bands, is still going to be better than music that's produced today.
Oh yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, I agree.
And this is one thing good about this podcast, and I've found more new music in the last 6 years than I did for a long time, because especially with the internet, there is good music out there and good bands out there. You just got to know how to find them, and it's hard.
I remember when I was a kid, I'd go to Aaron Records on Melrose, and I'd flip through the $1.99 records, and I pull out Judas Priest, Unleashing the East. Now, I never heard of Judas Priest, but I like good music, I'm like, this looks good. I buy it. I put it on. I'm like, wow, where did this come from? That's what happens. You discover new music. That's the way I discovered it, and going through records and finding a cover and say, this looks like it's going to be good.
Yep.
I remember hearing my sister's Black Sabbath. We sold ourselves for rock and roll. And I said, I don't know who Black Sabbath is, but I'll give it a try. And I put it on, and I hear thunder and lightning. I thought it was raining, that first song on there, they're playing Black Sabbath. And so now I'm a Black Sabbath fan, but now I just don't know how people find good music. I mean, I don't know. It's not, things have changed.
Yeah. So Mark, when does the podcast or the video podcast start, and where can people find it?
They can definitely find it at first50gigs.com, because that's the website that's connected to it. You have to sign up, and I believe there's 3 different tiers. I think it's like $5. It's like a membership. It's like $5 a month or something for the minimum, and then there's 2 other tiers, and the other tiers get you a little bit extra. One of them just gets you sound, and the other one gets you video. And then later the other one gets you like some memorabilia, or maybe even some like Canter's foods, like a box of chocolate chip arugula. Jason is my co-author from Reckless Road, and he's really the mastermind behind producing this and doing the interviews. And sure, I'm on there and I'm talking with the guests, and together we're talking about the stories, but he's a good person to pull out these stories from you. He knows how to get you to answer the right questions. So he's really the mastermind behind this.
So when you do sign up for this, are they coming out like once a month each episode, or are they all on there at one time and you just watch it at your leisure, or how does this going to work?
That's a very good question. I believe, last I heard, and it could change, I believe every 2 weeks they're going to release one episode. Gotcha.
Okay.
And they might give you one for free. I think the first one might just be free. Or if it's not the first one, it's a bonus one. Okay. Sometimes we came up with some bonus ones that weren't really in our thought process of organizing this, but they happened while we were doing them. And we stumbled on a couple things, so that's going to be bonus episodes.
That sounds.
How many hours of footage did you have?
I believe I videotaped. I probably have about 30 hours of footage. And it was difficult because sometimes by nature, I want to take pictures. And but then when video came out, I have to get the video. So sometimes I was doing both. I'd set the camera at a wide angle and then just take a snap, still snap 4, 5, 6 pictures a show while, drop the video for a sec, or not drop it, but just leave it on wide angle. But video gets boring if you leave it on wide angle. So you gotta, pan around and move and keep it alive.
Right.
Otherwise it just gets, if you set it on widescreen the whole time, you're going to fall asleep in about 6 minutes. But there's something else I noticed too. I've been listening to some of the Beatles stuff that they put out. I guess, I don't know if they're outtakes, not outtakes, but they're like demo tapes and stuff. I guess they put it out with the White Album. Maybe they did a box set. I'm not sure what it is, but I hear it on Sirius Radio. And I heard like a version of Come Together, and it sounds nothing like the record. So you got to give George Martin the credit of taking what the Beatles put together and really just like, putting it out there.
Right.
Where Guns N' Roses, they put it out there the first time they played it. It was just there. That's the way you're going to hear it on the record, right down to the guitar solo. Slash will rip out a guitar solo, and that's it. He remembered it. It fit. It's there. It will never change. Now, he didn't tape record it and then relearn it. It came out and, he remembered it and it worked, so kept it. So, but when Mike Klink, the producer, got there, they went through a handful of different would-be producers. And when they landed on Mike Klink, they hit the gold mine because he knew how to, they were wild and he knew how to tame them and he knew how to record them. And he was good enough to understand what they were doing. The arrangements they made worked and didn't try to fiddle too much with them. Sure, he might have had a couple suggestions, but most producers want to play, school teacher and you're the kids and this is how it's going to be. And, when you go back to the 60s, all that stuff was done. A producer had so much control, maybe not on the Doors, but for most other bands, the producer pretty much was the ruler. And Tom Zutaut was so smart. He was the guy that signed them to give them creative control of the record, of how, the music, the songwriting, what's going to happen, because he was smart enough to see that, you don't touch that. They got it. There's, these 5 guys are working together. And there's something about the value of the guys in the Appetite for Destruction lineup. If you try to divide them up by 100% and say, well, let's see, what do you think their values are worth? Well, you got to give Axl 50% just on principle. Well, okay, well, how could you do that? Well, what about Slash? What about Izzy? What about Duff? So let's say you give Slash 40%. You're going to tell me there's only 10% left? No. So by the time you give Izzy 40% and Duff 35% or whatever, something, and Steven at least 20%, you're at like 200%. Yeah. So you can't divide that up into anything. That's why it was so powerful. You had an overabundance of great input. And I watched them put songs together. I watched them, not every song, but I watched them jam on riffs, and then I watched it become a song. And I could see how Slash and Izzy fed off each other. And at the same time, Axl watching it and knowing exactly what 2 cents to put in. And it just all of a sudden, boom, there's a song. And well, who wrote it? Well, guess what? Maybe someone started it, but they all got a piece of it, Mm-hmm. And then if you take away Steven's drums, just think about how many less pregnancies there'd be from not listening to Rocket Queen, Sure, another drummer, they would have made it, but the record wouldn't sound like that. It just wouldn't.
No.
So
the chemistry of those guys on that first album is that's why that album is what it is. Because right. I mean, it was lightning in a bottle. I mean, it was perfect.
It was a magical input of 5 people that were hungry to make good music, and they knew that the music. Here we are in 1985, and we're already saying the music went downhill because what was going on in 85? Really, not much of anything. Who was around? Rat, maybe some Motley Crue. It wasn't really. Nothing was happening, and they were influenced from the 60s and mainly 70s probably. And they just threw all that punk and Rolling Stones and, Eros. I always said like Slash is the hard rock guy and Izzy is and blues. And, Izzy is like the Rolling Stone guy and Duff is the punk. Axl's a little bit of everything. And Steven had the funk, funky punch to put in there. And it just, Axl knew what to do with what Slash was offering, and Slash knew what to do with the rest of the band was offering, and everybody just worked on whatever somebody came up with. They made a song out of it and had all their footprints on it. So it just was, it was a magical time. It really was.
Cool.
I'm looking forward to watching this.
Yeah. Well, it's great that you had somebody that you were there and people were there to be able to get that and document it so that later we can enjoy it. So that's awesome. So this comes out pretty soon, Mark, right? Not in August. Is that right?
I believe the last I checked, I think it might be, it's like next week. I think it's the first or the second. I should know this, but
about the time this show comes out, it'll be either ready or either it had to come out or will be coming out. So
you go to first50gigs.com, it'll probably tell you what day it's coming out. But I believe it's it's definitely next week.
Because the show comes out on the 5th, so it'll definitely probably be
the 5th. Yep,
cool.
That'll match up pretty good. Well, thank you, Mark. We really appreciate you being on the show tonight.
Anytime. And I think we have each other's email. I'll send you out a book in the mail.
Okay, cool.
Okay, great.
You guys in the same location or different locations?
Different locations. So we're in Indiana. Both of us are in Indiana. I'm just south of Indianapolis, and he is in the southern part of the state near Evansville.
Yes.
All right. Well, if you send me email, if you have my email on this Zoom invite,
okay.
I might have yours. I'll see if I can. If I get your addresses, I'll send you out a book.
Okay.
Great.
Sounds great.
Awesome.
All right. Hang on there just a second and let us get out of here and we'll chat for one more second. All right. Thanks, guys. I want to thank Mark for being on the show tonight. And you guys know the drill. You can find us on all of these social media outlets. And you can find us on about everything you can find any podcasts on. And we look forward to hopefully hearing from you guys about what you thought of the episode tonight. So take care and we're out of here. Peace out.
Thanks for listening to the Ages of Rock podcast. If you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, and most importantly, tell all your friends. Remember, you're never too old to rock. Until the next episode, peace out, folks.